early on searching for Statesmen, we talked about building codes in Pennsylvania and how these are minimum standards that are arrived at by various organizations at the international, national, and state level, and how Pennsylvania has the final say on these. Well, recently the state legislature has injected itself into the process and in fact is looking to roll back certain minimum standards. We want to talk about that today and how it has implications that may be life and death for you. I have two gentlemen with me that know what they're talking about. Don Kunkel has been the fire chief in Harrisburg for 20 years, retired, and now serves as executive director of the Pennsylvania Fire and Emergency Services Institute. Ray Lonabaugh serves as director of the Mideast region of the
National Fire Protection Association. I'm the regional manager. I cover 5 states.
But more importantly than that, has been a firefighter for 40 years. Now, why are we talking about fires? Well, one of the standards that the building codes process has recommended for Pennsylvania is that fire sprinklers be installed in every single new single-family home in Pennsylvania. The legislature is about to repeal that requirement with not so much as a hearing, without any further consideration. And while they're doing that, they're also, for good measure, going to be rolling back some of the provisions as they relate to building codes. The question is why? Where are we going with this? The fire commissioner in Pennsylvania estimates that about 190 people lose their lives in Pennsylvania every year in single-family dwelling fires. The legislature is about to take an action that is going to put at risk 190 lives in Pennsylvania. And as people involved in the fire services and as people involved in the construction industry, we're trying to figure out why. Don Kunkel, what's going on? What's happening up in the Senate this week?
Well, the Senate is going to have a hearing on Wednesday, and it appears they're poised to pass, at least report out of committee, a bill that was already passed the House, House Bill 377, that will remove sprinklers from the part of the code in Pennsylvania. And we would ask everyone to call their senators now and ask them not to take that action. Sprinklers are absolutely critical, not only to the 190 civilians that die every year in the state of Pennsylvania, but we lose in excess of 10 firefighters most years as well in Pennsylvania. And it's a critical firefighter safety issue. Today's environment is more combustible. The building construction is much lighter weight and it fails earlier. And from a firefighter survivability factor, sprinkling new construction is a must.
Now, let me ask you this. Who objects to this? Why are we looking to repeal the requirement? If, in fact, you said to the average person about to build a new home, you have to install sprinklers in your new home, is the reaction that they're too expensive? Is that what's being told to them?
Price is a small concern, and the price is about $1.65 a foot in construction where you have a municipal water supply. It is about $1,000 more if you're on a well. The system needs no annual maintenance. It doesn't require backup power, so it's a pretty simple system and it's very reliable. The two objections that we hear from are people who say this should be an individual choice. And my response to that is it may be an individual choice until you have a fire and you dial 911 and ask a firefighter to come and die in your lightweight constructed home. You're now impacting somebody far beyond you and your family. And we think that that's a proper thing for government to mandate.
And let me ask you, Ray, along that line, isn't this somewhat analogous to where we were in the auto industry 20 or 30 years ago when we were having the debate about seat belts and then about airbags? There was objection to that, and people said, look, it should be my personal choice, and the government doesn't have a right to mandate and so on. But I don't think that there are too many car manufacturers who make vehicles without airbags these days.
No, and the same with seatbelts. I mean, if you get in a car today and if you get in with somebody else, the first thing they're going to say, the driver's going to say, don't forget your seatbelt. Yeah. I mean, that's, you know, it's become normal. And in fact, there are areas that I travel through where if you're not wearing it, you'll get pulled over for it. I mean, it's expected now. It's a norm.
And what about this issue of cost? Because I know that the builders are telling the members of the legislature that, look, this is going to cost so much that it's going to inhibit the housing market, and we already have a problem with that. But compared to, say, countertops and rugs and lights in your homes, how does adding a sprinkler add to the cost?
You know what? I don't understand that, Mark. I mean, they say they're protecting the consumer and it's extra cost and all, but I would ask anyone who's bought a house recently, when has a builder tried to talk you out of a bump out, to enlarge a room, going with better carpets or going with the granite countertops, do they talk you out of that? No, if anything, they're gonna talk you into it. I mean, maybe the problem is that maybe we should have presented a profit margin that they can get for sprinklers. I don't know. I really don't know what the answer is.
But they probably can.
But along with cost, let me say this much. We talk about the fire deaths. What really doesn't come up is the injuries, fire injuries, burn injuries, and what that costs. What that costs, just to the person themselves who now has a deformity or has to go through all that, and what the medical costs are. It bothers, it drives me crazy. And I know that the opposition to sprinklers, I can't help but go back to Hollywood. And if you ever take a tour of the Hollywood studios, the first thing they will tell you is that all this stuff is an illusion. They make that very clear. They always say an illusion. We see movies, and we see I think it was Backdraft with Kurt Russell coming through the room with the coat open and the hat, no smoke, and he's got a child. That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. You've got tremendous smoke. You've got tremendous heat. In our dwellings today, all right, we have more synthetics today than we ever had. Our fires are hotter today. Ask any firefighter. They're hotter today than they were years ago. All right. Along with the hotter fire, the construction of homes are different. I grew up in an old Philadelphia row house that had plaster lath walls, compartmentized to beat the band, big heavy wooden doors. I look at my daughter's new house, and it's open floor concept, plastic doors. To begin with, you've got the fire load in there in any house that's going to really take off. And now that the way this open floor concept, the door, it's going to move through the house rapidly. And we could see that. And like Don said, with the lightweight construction, now keep in mind, when we respond to a fire, we respond to the contents. New home, old home, whatever it is, it's the contents. However, once the fire grips the structure, all right, you've got a problem. Case in point was an incident that happened down in Loudoun County, Maryland, where the fire got into the truss roof, trapped 4 firefighters. One guy never returned to the job. He was burned that bad. Here's a cost, all right, right there. You could say, well, smoke detectors, and yes, we always say sprinklers and smoke detectors do the job. But I can go to an incident that happened in Bucks County, I think it was last year, with a mom and 2 kids at home, fire in the dining room, right? Smoke detectors went off. In fact, the first engine there was a career engine. I mean, it wasn't a case we had to gather volunteers. They're out the door and they go. They got the two kids out. One of them died. They're doing CPR on the front lawn to get them going, and as they rescued the mother, the house flashed over. And basically, they just barely got her out. And as one guy said to me, I was at the bottom of the stairwell, and they didn't take the steps, they just jumped over and came down.
And yet the builders continue to say that we're okay with just smoke detectors. What's wrong with that? What's the difference between smoke detectors and sprinklers?
Let me just back up for a minute and finish. I mentioned about flashover and take that woman out. Flashover, when you see flames coming out the window, that's when the room or the building is flashed over. Years ago, because of the old style materials that we used, flashover would take 15, 20 minutes. With the synthetics that we have today, flashover is very rapid. It's 3 to 4 minutes. You've got flashover. Now think about that. The time a person hears a smoke detector alarm go off, they call 911, the fire department responds. Chances are when the fire department gets there, it's already flashed over. And like I say, and Don will probably agree with me on this, some fire departments now are looking if this is a lightweight constructed house, or are we going to go in for fear that we're going to be in trouble.
So you're saying, basically, if you're going to exercise your right, supposedly, not to install sprinklers, are we going to get to a point where firefighters have the right to say, I'm not going in that home?
Well, unfortunately, we're being forced to move in that direction, and I don't think any firefighter is pleased with that choice.
No. Right.
We have the technology to prevent that from happening and allow firefighters to have confidence in fighting fires in older homes. And we think it's a real simple solution is to install the sprinklers in new ones and move forward.
Right. And the sprinklers versus smoke detectors.
Well,
because the builders have really put a full court press on the legislature and said, we're okay. We're safe. We don't need sprinklers. The smoke detectors do that. But that's really not the case, is it?
That's not the case, and the builders have consistently misused NFPA data,
Yes.
National Fire Protection Association data on the effectiveness of smoke detectors. In fact, the NFPA wrote to them and asked them to quit using the data in the manner they were, and the builders have refused to date.
Skewing the data.
But the bottom line with smoke detectors, and what people don't realize is, first of all, many kids, many teenagers don't respond to the noise. If you have a child that doesn't wake up to an alarm clock, they aren't going to wake up to a smoke detector.
Right.
And when you're looking at 4 minutes to flash over, as Ray talked about, you may not have time to alert that child in another manner. So you're putting your kids at huge risk when you do that. And secondly, people assume that a smoke detector functioning during a structure fire, you're going to awaken to conditions similar to what you do on Saturday morning when you burn the bacon, where you have that light, wispy, sort of irritating smoke, but there's nothing really amazing about it. I interviewed 50 or 60 people at least during my career who had survived fire, and when you would talk to them, they would say the smoke detector didn't work. How did you become alert to the fire? So we'd say, well, we heard the smoke detector, but by the time we reacted, the smoke condition was at waist level, and it was descending rapidly. If we wouldn't have been able to get out of the building in another minute or so, we would have been dead. And that panic, if you haven't thought about that in advance, oftentimes leads to somebody standing up in that smoke condition instead of crawling and collapsing. And a lot of fire deaths are done just because people don't anticipate how dangerous that is.
Sure. And I can't help but notice that the tragic fire that occurred in Perry County where the children were by themselves, well, smoke detector can go off, but the children aren't going to know what to do. And in fact, 5 of those little children died. And had there been a sprinkler in place, they would be alive. And note this, the contractor who's building the new home has chosen to put sprinklers in. And that says something, I think.
Right. Mark, what Don has just said about jumping up in the smoke, we've had victims that just done just that. And you could see the burn mark across the chest from there up where they jumped up in the superheated gases. But I'd like to back up on something else along with that when he talks about the smoke being banked down. The byproducts, there's several different byproducts in smoke, but probably 2 of the ones that'll affect the respiratory system. The 2 of the ones that really upset you would be CO2 and CO, carbon monoxide. The hemoglobin in the blood has a greater affliction to grab carbon monoxide than it does oxygen. The thing with carbon monoxide, and I did a little study on this because of going across fire fatalities, carbon monoxide acts like a drug. It impacts your logic. I've seen where a person has scratched right underneath the window to try to get through a wall, and the window was right above them. And it affects them like a drug. It really does. And I remember seeing this in a couple of fires, and I went back and started doing some research on it. And it impairs their logic, it impairs their the reason, it impairs them to make a good judgment call or where they are. It throws them off.
So here's where we are. The legislature is about to take an action to approve House Bill 377. House Bill 377 rolls back a requirement that would provide sprinklers in homes. If in fact we do that, we are putting people's lives at risk. They are no more expensive than installing carpeting in your home, the cost of about 2 cups of coffee over the course of a month, over the course of your mortgage. And yet we're heading in that direction, it seems. Haven't we gone through this before? Didn't Pennsylvania enact a requirement to put sprinklers in dorm rooms? What happened when we did that in the state?
We did about 4 years ago. The legislature took a fairly courageous action at the time and voted to put sprinklers in every dormitory in a college in Pennsylvania. At that time, Pennsylvania led the nation in deaths in dormitories. Since the sprinkler bill has been enacted, we have not had a fire death in any dormitory in the state of Pennsylvania. We don't think there's any better evidence to do that. And just real quickly, when we were talking about the economics of installing sprinklers, and the builders would have you believe we're pricing people out of the housing market and all sorts of things. Read over the weekend a National Association of Builders study that says townhouses are leading the building trades out of the current recession. They're selling faster than better than traditional single-family homes. The interesting part about that is sprinklers have been required in the townhouse code since January 2010. That's the lower end of the market, and that's exactly the price point that the builders say will be impacted the most by doing this. So their own numbers contradict what they claim is going to happen, and it has had no negative effect. In fact, townhouse sales are more positive than single family.
Don, just to add on to that, Maryland has had a requirement in townhouses since 1992. Along around the same time that Prince George's County enacted, was the first county in Maryland to enact a county-wide sprinkler ordinance for new construction, which, by the way, the NFPA's done a study on, and they have had no fire deaths in the sprinkler homes since that time.
So for very good reasons. First of which is that sprinklers save lives. The second of which is that sprinklers are inexpensive and they do not have a deleterious effect on the housing market whatsoever. The third is that we live in a system of laws and an orderly system of regulations, and we need some kind of minimum standards for our housing and construction. For all of those reasons, we're asking folks to contact your senator. Contact them now and tell them that the sprinkler requirement makes sense for Pennsylvania. In the long run, it is a life-saving measure that we should not just discard so easily. We're asking people to ask their senators to stand up and be statesmen. In the search for statesmen, we need people with the courage to stand up and do the right thing. Call your senator, ask them to do the right thing, ask them to oppose House Bill 377 or to amend it in such a fashion so that we can still take advantage of the life-saving aspects of sprinklers.